Welcome to episode 8 of Origins Unknown podcast. My name's Claire Huntington.
And I'm Chris Holt. This week we interviewed Nikole, an adoptee that has one of the most intricate family relationships that we have had on our podcast thus far. I literally had to write it all down just to keep it straight.
Nikole offered us a unique insight into her family adoption story from the vantage point of a mental health care provider. She's also the first adoptee that has used a searcher or a private investigator on our podcast.
As adoptees, we often feel like we have to search alone, and I, for one, am excited to explore searchers and private investigators as an option. Transnational adoptees like myself have much more of an uphill battle when it comes to finding our origins unknown.
Access to readily available information is something that I have to admit I've taken for granted. And speaking with Nikole has been one of my favorite experiences on this podcast so far.
So we are so excited to bring you this episode and introduce Nikole and her story.
Enjoy!
I think I walked the long way home. Now fall, just pick me up and hold me close when things get rough. And you never walk the road alone, 'cause we've all got our origins unknown.
Welcome to Origins Unknown podcast. My name's Claire Huntington.
And I'm Chris Holt.
And we have with us
Nikole Shaw.
Welcome!
Hi, thank you for having me.
We're so excited to have you here. So, Nikole, let us know where you're from.
I am from a really small town named Brea. So it's in Southern California, Orange County, Brea, California. I like to tell people it's next to Disneyland, so, you know.
Is it actually, though?
It's like maybe 20 minutes.
That's
Brea
close.
is like maybe the northernmost city in Orange County, so it's not quite close enough to the beach to like go to the beach every day, but it's close enough to just drive, you know.
So we're going to your house for Christmas so that I can go to Disneyland for Christmas.
I miss Disneyland so much.
So we said that we wanted to go to Disneyland, and then for, I think, like next year, we have a bucket list of places we want to go in the States. So we'll put that on the Origins Unknown podcast tour. When the world opens up, we can go and visit all of our adoptees.
Yes. I love
that'd
it.
be awesome.
Perfect.
All right. Well, Nikole, I guess we can just start with you just kind of telling us about you and your story.
Gosh, where do I start?
The beginning.
We'll start, right, the beginning. We could start in Brea, California. People often ask, like, did you know you were always adopted? And I did, actually. So I don't remember any distinct conversation that I sat down with my parents and had, but I always knew that I was adopted. And so just growing up in the 80s and 90s in a predominantly white community, we were the only Black family, on the street. And I went to an all-white school for the most part, like my sisters and brothers, who are adopted as well. Oh. So we've got kind of an interesting family. My sister, who I call my sister, she's not my biological sister. She's actually my mom's biological niece.
Okay.
So they adopted her. And then my brother is an adoptee as well. And he doesn't know his family, kind of same. So he's kind of the same as me in that regard, just like he was adopted. And then I have an older brother who is from my dad's first marriage. So he's my stepbrother, technically.
Okay.
And then later on in life, maybe when I was in high school, my parents adopted my sister's biological brother. So we had quite the mixed up little family there.
So you're the biological niece?
Yes.
So the biological niece's brother.
But he didn't come until later.
So there was two closed adoptions, and then so far two in-family adoptions. Okay.
Yes.
So for our users who are just tuning into this episode, a closed adoption, predominantly adoptees cannot access their birth records and don't have any identifying information. In-family adoptions are were more common in the 80s and 90s. It was when a family member would adopt a child to keep them in the family, and oftentimes you'd be raised as a sister to your birth mother and then wouldn't know. So we have a lot of non-adoptees as our user listener group, so we try to make it accessible.
That makes sense. And
so there's five total kids?
Yes.
Okay,
so there's
cool.
5 total kids, although my Devin, he didn't come along until much later. So he didn't really like necessarily grow up with us.
Got it.
So we grew up in this really strict household. I mean, we're in an affluent community in Orange County. My dad played in the NFL. And and my mom was just a strict, Southern belle. She was from like deep Georgia, and my dad is from Texas. So, and his family was more affluent, had their own business in Orange County. I mean, they all went to college, which was very different for Black people back then, and Black families. And I think they've all got like master's degrees. Like they're very,
oh, wow.
So it was the way my family was, you had to just maintain a certain look all the time. And part of that look was not, letting people know that you were adopted. It was like, don't talk about it. Don't, people, that's our family business. And so that was pretty difficult growing up. And I didn't understand, right? Like who can understand that? Like what's the big deal?
Yeah. I think maybe like, 80s and 90s. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like even with my family, it was obvious just because my parents are white and I'm Asian. So that was just an obvious conversation. But if you're the same ethnicity, then I mean, maybe it's just, again, sometimes, and I'm not speaking for your parents, but like there are insecurities, I think, with all adoptive parents. And I think maybe the social pressures of the, I guess, demographic society that you were in with being in an affluent area, you want to maintain appearance, and I get that because I grew up in that type of, I mean, Claire and we both, all of us grew up into well-to-do families. So it is very much about appearance and what you put forth to anyone, so I think in
terms of like Chris, like not being like in a like trans ethnic adoption, you don't have that option as a adoptive mother. And then just the demographic, like you said, and the era of viewing the adoptive mother as like defective or, like just like that pressure. And so here you are as the child and it's nobody's fault. However, we are forced to rewrite our story. And I oftentimes listen to adoptive parents talking about, oh, it's weird to hear, you talking about your family's story. And I kind of correct them. I'm like, well, this is my story. Like I didn't choose to be adopted. I didn't choose to get born. I didn't choose to be adopted. And I didn't choose to adhere to this societal norm of a Hallmark story of everything being perfect. And then me being a commodity that just slots right into your family, right? Like it's this thing that people don't understand how damaging it is to make a child feel guilty or like something is wrong with them. I remember when people would tell me, oh, why are you sharing this? Like people who weren't in my family, it made me feel like this was something shameful, and like, did you feel weird and ashamed and conflicted? Like, did it have any sense of your identity?
Say that shame is probably the most prominent theme that has reared its ugly head throughout my life. Like, I think when I talk to other adoptees, I feel like shame is like one of those emotions that is so congruent for all of us. And it's the shame that, my adoptive mother couldn't have a baby. It's the shame of like, not being able to be myself or whoever that was. Like, here's one thing that would stick out is that my dad came from a very athletic family. So it was like, you needed to be an athlete and that was what you needed to do. And there was so many other things that like, I am, like I'm creative. Like I remember wanting to be a dancer. Like I remember wanting to just be so many things. And because my adoptive parents hadn't worked this out within themselves, I had to conform to this idea of what they wanted me to be. And that's also like denouncing everything, even cultural. Like my biological family is like straight Belizean and Jamaican. But I think like as Black people, I can speak for myself, like culturally, you just look Black. So that's like do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like you just look Black. And so you're just Black. Like, but when I found out I had all this rich culture, it was just, I couldn't, it was just so overwhelming. And it's also something I struggle with, because do I deserve it? Do I own it? Am I that? Like, so it's
how do you like justify the books? And I would just like to point out, if you're not watching on our YouTube channel, I would just like to point out that you just lit up when you talked about your culture and your history. And that's one of the issues that non-adoptees don't understand, especially if you are. So Chris has a luxury of knowing that he's from South Korea. That's one of the differences between our adoptive story. Whereas you and I, there was that question mark. And it's especially me, like, I don't know, right? Like I have no idea. And so it's that disconnect. You don't know your roots, and watching you right now just talk about it, and you started doing hand moments, and there's shoulder shimmy.
Yeah, when you talk about like countries like Jamaica and Korea, I think that they're, like you said, it's such a rich culture and country and history, and I totally empathize with that. It's like I want to go back to Korea just to kind of immerse myself into that culture and kind of connect in a way that you and I and all of us that are adopted really can't do based on our circumstance. But it sounds like you were already, set aside the adoption part, you were already kind of put into these limitations already within your family structure, the place you were living, and all those other things. So yeah, that's super fascinating.
Yeah, and it was just, I think growing up, when I think about my mom and I think about just like whatever persona that they wanted to maintain, and it's just like, it was very much don't talk about it. So I grew up thinking like, back to feeling shameful, like, was something wrong with me? Did I do something wrong? And I felt so lost all the time. But it was, but if I expressed any of that, then I wasn't able to talk about that. Like I wasn't able to even process that. So here I am as an adult, like having to process like all these huge emotions,
Well, yeah, it's these huge emotions that I think all of us are kind of thrown at us at a very young age. And that's really the part of that trauma, or that, I guess, that complex that we all develop for the most part, is that, we're not mature enough at such a young age to understand the idea of adoption. Like it's so complex. Yeah. And so I'm kind of curious though, with your adoptive brothers and sisters, like, have you, maybe you couldn't talk to your parents about it at some degree, but did you ever talk to your siblings about it?
Well, see, this is the funny thing, is that actually just recently, me and my brother, Eric, we just were able to connect to this because he was kind of in the fog. I don't know if you guys like that term or not, but I just feel like it's like an easy term to throw out there.
I just heard it like a week ago. Someone said you're still in the fog, and I was like, don't tell me where I'm at. Like I got real defensive. I was like, who are you to tell me about my experience? Like,
right.
But I do realize that it is a like an actual term for, adoptees and stuff.
Yeah,
like
just sort of like not, I think it's just like a blanketed term for really not diving into your adoption. And so there's so many of these complex pieces of it, but usually when people are in the fog, they just ignore it in some aspects or another. So my brother always had an interesting relationship with my adoptive mom, and we all have had different relationships in that way. And so recently, both him and I have severed our relationship with her. So him and I have connected on that point. So we were able to talk about it now, but growing up, we never talked about it. We never talked about it because we were scared. Like
you can't face it.
Yeah. Like we were so afraid And I think as kids, you start to, that's where a lot of codependency comes in, right?
Yeah.
Like you start to figure out, like, how do I take care of this adult's emotions? So it's all about not wanting to offend someone or not
Rock the
wanting,
boat. Yeah.
yeah, share this secret or whatever it is. And I'm just trying to live, you know?
And it's called disorganized attachment theory. There's a really great YouTube that I will post to our Instagram page or within these notes. And it shows, it's a cartoon, and it's such a heartbreaking, illuminating cartoon of watching a child approach the person who's supposed to be giving them the care and attention and not getting that attention, and keep coming back and going back and forth. And that ultimately just like affects you as a human being and like your relationships for the rest of your lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this feeling of shame and not being able to express your culture and trying to survive. It's a survival tactic of you take your emotions and you like suppress them. And then as you become an adult, you learn not to speak out. And so it affects every aspect of your life and your development.
Well,
so these things that you wanted to do, like non-athletic things or art or dancer, right? You're not allowed to create your own identity. And us as adoptees, we often feel this sense of shame and need to conform, because after, I don't know what it's like now, we'll have to check into it, but something that really bothers me is that after the home visits and after, you know, they identify that an adoptive family is a great adoptive family, that's where it stops. There was nobody checking in on me or you, or a lot of the, like some of the actually horrible stories that we heard. There was nobody checking in on these adoptees. There's this assumption that every approved adopted home is good. And that's not the case. And we don't give kids the fortitude or the understanding or the support that if there's something wrong, to speak out. It just flabbergasts me.
Not enough research or like done like on the real effects of adoption. Like I would go as far as to say that all adoptees struggle so much with like relationships, you know, like like attachment issues, like secure attachments, like trust. I mean, there's so many things that I think, again, congruently, just all adoptees like suffer with. And a lot of it is just par for the course. Like it just comes with being adopted. Like you can have, not all adoptions are bad, or not everyone had the same experience. Like there's open adoptions that people have had, and they're insecure. They're securely attached to their adoptive parents. However, I think so many of us struggle, and then we wake up and we're like in our 30s and 40s and we're like, what is going on? Like, why are these things still coming up? And then I'm like, oh, I'm adopted. But it does, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, because
that's like yours in my conversation. Yeah.
I think that most adoptees don't want to view it. I mean, as much as it is this thing that is kind of always somehow on our mind, consciously or subconsciously. And I've never wanted to view it as like this crutch or something that's hindering me. But, you know, like you said, I'm in my like late 30s, almost 40, and I'm just now like unsurfacing a lot of things that I just didn't realize were there. And then to kind of go back to your point about, you know, there's just not a lot of research done on the effects of adoption on an individual. But I also think that I don't think there's anything out there for adoptive parents to be quote unquote educated, you know, to say, hey, look, this is the situation and these are things you need to be mindful of. I'm not, you know, it's not saying this is how you should raise your child, but just to have research to say, hey, this shows that adoptees suffer from these types of things, and to maybe help not completely erase them or cure them, but to help kind of give that person, all of us, a better platform to stand on when we're adults. Because,
well, I always thought that I posted this the other day, like, adopted parents that are going to adopt, like, y'all need to go to therapy first. That should be a requirement before somebody goes, like, tries to adopt some kids, because it's a lot.
Not to boost Canada, but in order to adopt a child, you actually have to go through extensive courses now.
Well, didn't we have that pre-interview with the woman that does law for surrogacies, and she said that there's more psychological testing that needs to be done for people that are doing surrogacy than just pure adoption, which to me it just seems like, well, why isn't it for both, you know?
Yeah.
And you're right. I think
well, for us, like my friends tried to adopt here, and they had to go through extensive courses, home visits, therapy, and discussion. So there is, it does differ place to place, but they had to go through things like like alcohol and drug effects, like things that, you know, if their child deals with that. So there are like, you know, I think we're more speaking from like where we were adopted in our time period. I think that now there is, as us adoptees become adults, it is our responsibility to continue discussing our issues and being an advocate for future adoptees. There's certain things that Chris and I have encountered and that we faced just because of this podcast that we could have repressed for forever. And us going through these experiences and interviewing people like you and sharing our stories is going to be, you know, we are the generation that needs to protect the next generations.
Mm-hmm.
So creating resources and stuff like that.
But even for you, Nikole, I think your family structure for sure. I mean, let's be honest, not many of us grow up with a professional football player as a father. I'm sure that was very intimidating, you know? And, you know, that, I mean, anyone that knows any type of competitive athlete knows that that's a certain mindset that, you know, there are just certain ways you do things. And
my dad was in the military too.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay.
I was like,
so,
you know,
yeah.
it was very
in line. Yeah.
Like it was, I mean, I love my parents, you know, I think that in my healing journey, I've learned to have a lot of compassion and empathy for people in general, and especially for my adoptive parents, just in the sense that they were only raising me from, you know, whatever wounds that they had and hadn't probably resolved. And so I try to give them grace for that. But nevertheless, it was not being able to, I remember my mom having a conversation with us, like, if you want to find your adoptive parents, then like that's somehow like a slight on her, you know, and she just felt so strongly about it. So I used to fantasize like in my head, like, who are they? You know, where are they?
What was your fantasy? We love to ask. That's one of the things we love to ask. Adoptees.
I remember I used to fantasize that, of course, like that they were like rich and they were like actors, you know, because I always wanted to be like an actor. And so I just always just thought about them like living in like Hollywood, you know, just because I live close to Hollywood. And yeah, I don't know. I just would think all kinds of wild things, but I was never able to say, you know, to say these are the feelings that I'm having. And then going to school, like in those areas, plus it was me and my dad looked alike, which we don't at all. We only look alike because we only look alike because both of us have dark skin, but we don't look alike at all. So it would just, I remember like just carrying that feeling so much through grade school. Like, I don't, you know, not telling people. And then when we would kind of slip up, I guess, and tell people, and it would come back to my mom, like she would be so upset about it, you know? So
just panicked.
And like it just affected me so much.
And like, I think from your adoptive mother's stance, I can understand at a young age how that might be difficult to understand. But as you said, as you get older, you know, there is a level of like, you know, you can give someone a little benefit of the doubt just based on the fact that they were still kind of figuring it out too, you know? And I think
absolutely
it's so challenging because there's so many moving pieces in all of this. And
well, in hindsight, like my dad's, so there was my mom's side of the family and then my dad's side of the family. And my mom's side of the family always accepted us. They loved us. There was no differentiation between us and other cousins. We always felt very loved by them. Never talked about adoption, but there was they were always, you could tell they loved us so very much. And my dad's side of the family, they weren't as accepting. Yeah. And so I think that the contentions that my mom had with them really spilled over like into, so she always was protective of us, like, because she didn't want them to say anything, you know? And they didn't understand, like our cousins. I remember we had this conversation with our cousins like a long time, like when we all grew up and we started hanging out together. And we were like, y'all wasn't that nice to us. Like, y'all was mean. Y'all was some mean kids. And you would say things like, you're not my blood. And we were just so confused. Yeah.
And that's a taught behavior too. And like, so people don't understand too that. So it's called like a non-protective bystander. and it'll often happen. It's someone that is there and they, they're not speaking up for you. And it has that same ramifications that you're talking about when you're like, you guys weren't really that nice, right? And those people are like, well, I didn't really do anything. And it's like, well,
exactly.
And then you have to do these checks and balances. And it's crazy a lot of times in adopted situations, the adoptees we've been discussing with too, it's that feeling of like you perpetuated that behavior and you not doing something made me feel a certain way about myself. Right. And then did you find you would get like adrenaline rushes when you were having negative connotations with your adoption, or you slipped up, or your mom was confronting you about telling people? Like, did you have like a physical
it was
response?
Like that one, like it always felt provocative or, it felt scary, but I always would toe the line, and maybe bring it up like here and there, or like we said, we would talk about it with the kids on the street, and then somebody would come back and be like, mama said you was adopted, like, like that kind of stuff, You're
just like, no, that was a secret between us, Benji. I gave you a ring pop, and I told you a secret.
And I remember this one particular time that like we were playing with these other people that lived on the street. I think they were the only other Black family. And his mom, we were talking about, adoption. And I think like his mom must have gone back to my mom and told her like, oh, so I didn't know they were adopted or whatever. So it caught my mom off guard, of course, because, she's not really trying to talk about it like that.
So, for our listeners, just because I'm trying to understand this a little more, I'm looking at my notes here. With regards to your brothers and sisters, the 5 of you, I know you said Devin was taken in later.
Yeah.
What is like the ages of, when you were adopted and your siblings and the biological niece and all that?
Yeah. So I was adopted. I actually found out, interestingly enough, when I got that letter. What do they call that letter that you can order from the state? Well,
you're non-identifying information.
Yes. And it told me that I was adopted on my mom's birthday, she never told me that. And for some reason it bothers me. Like
that she didn't tell you?
Yeah, because I feel like it's like significant and
that would have been such a beautiful moment. Like you could have been a gift, right? What a fortuitous thing. Like my adoption date, I found it out in passing, like what the date was. And I remember just being like, wait, like I haven't been celebrating this date every year, right? Like it's just like, because what non-adoptees do not understand is that we had names before. We were, I know we had names before. And so the date that I became Claire Huntington was December 16th, 1987.
I'm going to need to make a drink if we're going to go over this.
Because that's a whole.
I know, but like I hate to say like, well, okay, I don't know it. So, but like we had names before, and like, and then just like listening to your story, with in terms of like your family too. One thing that we've been speaking now is at the point of podcasts where we need to talk to professionals. Chris and I joke that we're not therapists, but we've been through a lot of therapy, right? But I found out that adoptees, and Chris, you'll have to let me know like your experience, but adoptees who went through difficult adoption processes are incredible at picking up micro expressions. Like, do you find that you can read people and when they're mad at you or like a thought flickers across their face, like you know it, and you know it immediately?
Man, it's so difficult. I'm so vigilant in that way. It's very hard. Yeah.
And do you find it's really hard for you to form relationships? Because one of the adoptees we spoke to said that with the micro expressions that she could see immediately when someone was displeased with her. But the thing that adoptees don't realize is that someone will get displeased with you within flickers of seconds, like throughout, it's a check, like plus and minuses in a relationship. And the adoptee, in a difficult adoptee situation, your immediate thought is, oh my gosh, I've upset you. You're going to leave me. Right? Do you find that limits your ability to form attachments in relationships a bit? Like that ability to read people?
Absolutely. I mean, that's probably another one of those things, is my ability to attach or not attach. Really, I think, secure attachments, we could go on and on about them. But I think, yes, as an adoptee, you're always... Your life started off with someone giving you away, that's just facts. Whoever you are, whatever kind of adoptee you are. So there's something to that. And so you have to really, I think in order to be an adoptive parent, like you would have to spend a lot of time like telling a child that I love you, like you don't, whatever you do is not going to send you, back. Whatever you do.
And I've heard like adoptees talking about their adoptive parents using that as a threat. Like, you better stay in line.
My mom never explicitly said it like that, but she would say some stuff that like really hurtful, or she would do some things that were really questionable. That was the undertone. Like, maybe you may not have come out and said it, but it was definitely that feeling. And some of it was probably my stuff too, just feeling that way as a kid.
Well, and it's crazy. Like, you guys right now, so even here, like as I'm talking to you guys, I'm experiencing this feeling that every time I want to speak or say something, I like sit there and I can even see it on my face. I get nervous and I feel like I'm burdening you too, even though we're in this podcast to talk about adoption. So like with this conversation, I'm like, oh, I'm just bothering them. Right. And so it's like that view of like my personal feelings about myself are attributed to something that's so, like so deep seated.
But I think even my parents were because I think for my situation, we were obviously white people. They were white and we were Asian. So I just remember, and this is just a testament to my parents, especially my mother, she always presented the idea of adoption and our birth parents giving us up as this very kind of like, it's not a negative thing, like you should just know that, it was either stay there and maybe not have a great life, or live in poverty, or whatever the situation may have been, or they just wanted the best for us. And so that was always something that I just grew up knowing deep down inside. And so, I never had a negative feeling about that, or looked at it as like, wow, someone gave me away, but
I think it's hard to think of that in two ways, right? Because origins unknown. I mean, you guys, you don't know. Like, there's an assumption that just because this person, like the likelihood of them being underprivileged, just because that's a lot of the reasons why kids get given away, that your life wouldn't have been as good, or, you got this different opportunity. But I just think it's a trade-off, like you get some over here, and then, over here, like
just checks and balances.
It's very, it's hard in that way. I mean, so just to answer your question, I was adopted when I was 3 months old. So, and then my brother was adopted. I want to say he was, I think 6 months old.
So you're the oldest out of all the five?
No, I'm not.
Okay. The oldest. Oh, you have an older brother. That's right.
Yeah. So Maisha and Eric are the same age.
Okay.
And they're in their 40s. And then, so they were my brother was adopted first. And then at the same time, my parents took in my sister. So
got it.
Yeah. So then that was that. And they had already had Mark. He's the oldest. And then my mom, they adopted me after Eric and Maisha had, been there.
Okay. So then Devin, the last one, is he younger than you?
He is.
Okay, so you're the fourth, I guess.
Yes.
Okay, got it. I'm just trying to,
His story is a little bit different because, I was in foster care, and I spent those 3 months in foster care, which is always weird. I'm like, somebody took care of me. Like, where are they at? I want to thank you.
Yeah.
So I want to know so badly, like, who they are. But so with that, Devin actually was like a foster child, and then he was like in a group home, so he had a different life in that way, but we were directly adopted. And my sister, she kind of the same thing. Like, she came to live with my mom when she was like 6 months old, so she never knew another house. Whereas Devin kind of went back and forth, and then he didn't actually come to stay permanently until he was in 6th grade. So it was just a very different, flair.
Was he in the house for like a little bit and then away?
He did. So I remember he came to live with us when he was like maybe 1 year old, and he stayed with us for some months, and we just loved him so much. And then he had to go back, and it was so traumatic for us.
Why did he pull
Because his
back?
mom wanted him back at the time.
Why did he pull
Because his
back?
mom wanted him back at the time.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's something that we've been explaining to the non-adoptee community. And I found out from some of my friends who've listened to the podcast as well, that, you know, a lot of times adoptive parents will have a bag at the back of the door and like ready to go on vacation, because there's always that threat that, you know, and that fear, even when it's not legally possible, that the birth mom will come back, right? So that's
Right.
And the fact that you say that was traumatic, you know, and you loved him and formed an attachment.
Oh,
So then
yeah.
what happened from there? He
went to go live with his mom, and then he was like in and out of foster care, and he eventually lived with my other auntie for a little bit, and then he was like kind of too much to handle for her, so then my parents ended up adopting him.
Got it.
Yeah, but it was such a difficult thing, because think about that. My sister Maisha, she was really like a true adoption, where she was adopted when she was a baby. She lived with us. We don't know each other as anything else but siblings. Whereas Devin, he grew up like in and out of foster care, so he didn't quite have that same, like, I guess, brother sister feel, because he wasn't always there.
No,
so there was
he probably obviously probably developed way differently.
It was very odd, because my sister called my parents mom and dad, but Devin was always sort of identified as our cousin, and always it was weird.
Okay, wait.
That's confusing.
Yeah. So
how does that make you feel? Like, I can see Chris over there, and he's so good at like trying to write things down to remember stuff. It's one of his really thoughtful characteristics. So if people ever hear scratching and see Chris looking down, he's writing stuff down, because he thinks the information is so important, wants to understand. But you as a child, like, it's like playing double dutch. Like, this is your brother, he's gone, he's your cousin now he's your brother, and it's that feeling of like, adoptees don't have a blood relationship understanding. So here it's being shifted around. So like, how did that make you feel, like explaining that?
Oh man, it made me feel so bad. Like, it made me feel bad for my sister, because she's my sister. That's my, you know, but my mom, and I don't mean to hyper focus on that, but she would do things like make the distinction, and that would be really hurtful to my sister. And that would be really hurtful to me. So for a long time, I used to call him my cousin, and then I was like, you know, that's my little brother. You know what I mean? Like, that's my brother.
She would correct.
And that's your sister's biological brother, though, right?
That is her biological brother.
That's
but because he never really grew up with us like that, it just was kind of weird. And so he would call her, you know, aunt, and then my sister is calling her mom. So there's all these different dynamics going on.
And it's a hierarchy. Know? It's almost like,
let's not even get into the fact that my dad had a biological kid. So that always, you know, gives a nice little flair in there.
Before all the five?
Yeah. So Mark, my eldest brother, is my dad's.
That's right. That's right.
First child from his first marriage. So with Mark, like, he was, you know, just him being biological, and then us, and then Maisha was in her way, and then Devin was in his way, but then me and Eric weren't. So it just got it was a lot of dynamics going on, and a lot of feelings that never really got talked about.
Was there a hierarchy? As a child, were you able to recognize, like, how early on could you recognize that hierarchy? Like, when were you kind of aware of that distinction between the siblings?
Pretty early on. Like, I don't know if this is my own stuff, but like, Mark, you know, was he special because he was like the biological one, and plus he's also the eldest child. So then he's up here, and then Maisha. Here's the thing about Maisha and Eric. Technically, they were kind of raised as twins, because they're the same exact age. So they grew up, and they went to school together, you know, like all through school together in the same classrooms and stuff like that. So people would be like, y'all don't look alike. Like,
why do people have to like put people into boxes? Right? Yeah. Like, that's one thing that I'm noticing. Like, It's
But
like, okay.
it helps people just process things, unfortunately. Just as human beings, we're being bombarded with so much information every second that we have to kind of classify things in our brains just to help us remember things, correlate things between things. I mean, it's natural, but unfortunately, like it is
For me,
annoying.
looking like someone was so scary to me. Like I never knew what
Ooh,
it would be like to look like someone until I had my
same.
son. And even now I struggle with it
Oh,
so much.
weird.
So,
So wait, that
I
was scary
struggle.
for you? Just the idea?
Yeah.
Like,
Wow,
Like,
that's
that's the
my
first
face.
time.
Give it
That's the
back.
first time I've ever heard that.
oh, it was so scary for me. I was like, what is that going to be like? Someone to look like me, like exactly like me, because
Genetics
even
and
though like I said, my dad's darker skin, we have like kind of the same complexion. My mom is like very fair skinned. She don't look, no. You ain't fooling nobody. So, it's just one of those things that growing up, I just always like, well, what do they look like? And,
Mhm.
and I don't know if there's a part two that's like when I found my biological family and we look exactly alike. And I was like,
Oh,
oh
we
my
need to, yeah,
gosh.
we need to uncover that. That's like
Oh my God.
another.
I was like, so because Jonah, my son, I don't know. People say he looks like me, but I feel like, do I have like some kind of blinders on because I've adopted and it's so hard. Like I'll look at him sometimes and I'll be like, yeah, you look like me.
Yeah. But like
Yeah.
mannerisms and stuff, like I'm
No,
guessing, yeah.
definitely he's
Yeah.
my child. Trust
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
So in the last
Yeah.
episode, it's really funny that you say that. I didn't feel like I had that feeling, Chris, because before we talked to the psychic, I had thought, I'm like, I'm be so excited to see someone who looks like me. But in the psychic episode, here we thought it was just going to be like this fun, like uplifting, reading, and it was. But then she literally gave me a name.
Mhm.
She gave me a first name and a last name and a location. So of course, being an adoptee, I Googled.
Oh, she's been
And so
texting me
forth.
photos of random people. What do you think? What do you think? Do you see it?
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
kinda, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
There's
And
this
so
one.
wait, tell me again, you don't know, you don't, or you haven't found your biological.
I know nothing. I didn't even know what time, what city, or anything. So I found that out on episode 3. When I've been feeling like down, I just like Google and find side by sides. But there was one that all of a sudden it was super weird. She had like my face, like down to like, the
It was pretty
not
similar. Yeah.
like the like the things like crooked smile or like how your eye does a thing or
Mhm,
and I
mhm.
put side by side and I was like, is it, and it freaked me out. I've never seen someone who looks like me,
Yeah.
rather than me being like I used to try to force them like I look exactly like my brother, and I do look like my family in that I'm a composite of my parents. I have like similar features to my, like our coloring is all the same, like ash hair,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
right? But we're very different. But it's like people are like, oh yeah, like and I get the I don't know if you get this, but you don't look adopted, and I'm like,
Oh yeah, I've gotten that. People, what? I never even knew you. You don't look adopted. I'm like, what is
maybe
that
that's
look
the title
like?
of this episode. You don't look adopted.
Yeah, like what does that even look like?
Yeah. So Nikole, with the fear of, you mentioned of like seeing someone that looks like you or having the same genetics, despite the fear, was there still this desire to obviously search? I mean, I think
it's
all adoptees.
burning.
Yeah.
I just remember thinking about it all these different times in my life.
Mhm.
With also, the feeling that it's gonna hurt somebody. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? That it's gonna derail someone. Like because I'll never forget this, and I do know. I called when I started this at different parts of my life because I dated someone who was an adoptee, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like I never connected with other adoptees before, and when you start connecting with other adoptees, it's a different feel. Like we can vibe. Like I don't even know y'all. We could sit here and we could super vibe off of that because it's just a commonality that we all have.
Mhm.
And I had never realized how important that was. And so when I dated that person, he was like, well, you should try to figure this out. And I'm like, okay. And my mom, I remember
That's the adoptee conformist to relationships. We haven't touched upon this, but adoptees, because we spend our lives conforming into a family, it's really hard to not, when you're in a relationship, a lot of adoptees, and I'm guilty of this myself, you'll just take on their full personality and their interests. So you're like, yeah, like I totally want to find them. Like,
Yeah, exactly. When probably in hindsight wasn't ready. And so my mom had always told me, throughout the years, like a patchwork story, like, oh, she was 16. She was from the Virgin Islands, like, which wasn't true, by the way. That whole, oh, they loved you so much, they gave you up. And it was just like packaged like real nicely.
Mhm.
And she said, if you ever want, she had her feelings about us finding out about it. But I do remember her saying, there's a letter in my drawer, if you ever want to read it. And it was that the non-identifying information letter, whatever. And I remember in my 20s, I was having a lot of like just stuff coming up, and a lot of stuff. And so I was like, let me figure this out. It was like, I was 20, maybe 23, 24. It was my first introduction even into therapy. Like I was depressed. And so all these things were coming up, and I'm like, I need to look into this adoption stuff. So I found that letter, and I contacted the Orange County, like I was in Orange County Social Services. I contacted one of the social workers, and I'll never forget that person told me, and they're like, you do this, and you need to understand that you're opening Pandora's box, and you can't undo it.
Yeah, you can't close that door.
That scared me. When I was like in my 20s, I'm like, it's like that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
It was
like, I'm not going down that road. I don't know what's in that box. I don't want to do it. And then I feel like it comes up every day in some way or another. Like, not that I'm consciously thinking of it, but just that it's there. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't even start picking it up again until, like, I had wondered here and there. Like I did, a little bit of work around it, but never like really like, I'm going to do this, And then when I got into a relationship, I dated a psychotherapist. That was fun.
That's actually, I hate to say it, that's also another, through my therapy, that's another, adoptees are very, very attracted to mental health professionals to date.
And I'm also
becoming.
We need to talk about that. But I mean,
unpack that. Yeah.
But what you're saying is, it's this idea of path of least resistance, is that it's easier. And I've been told the same thing. You're opening a door, and ignorance is bliss, and just be okay with anything you find. And then I'm like, well, do I want to know now? Because I feel pretty good right now. But then you don't realize that even as we get older, it's like, no, I'm not fine.
Exactly. Yes. And all of this is like,
you're not okay.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the title of the episode. You're not okay. You're not okay.
That being an adoptee affects how you move in this world and how you connect to people. And even as a mother, like, that's a whole different path. Like, we're talking about looking like someone. And sometimes I'll just stare at my son like, yo, like, this is so...
It's crazy.
It's so powerful, because this is the beginning of that for me, because I don't know who birthed me before, I don't know what the birthing experience, nobody was there to tell me.
What a word.
Yeah.
Like, you just said that with such gusto, and it stressed me out. Like, and the whole concept of pregnancy freaked me out. And so what issues did you find when you're becoming a mother? Like, how did that affect, or what did that open up for you as an adoptee?
Nothing will trigger you like a child, especially I think, especially I think as an adoptee, because we're connected in a different way. And so, like, he's mine, like, he came from my womb. It's so... It's
profound.
It is. And it's something that I didn't think about as much before, because as an adoptee, you don't have that, that connection has been severed. So I don't necessarily think about, I know for me personally, I don't think about like my biological mom, like carrying me in her stomach and
really
kicking.
I do.
I never really thought about that stuff. But when I was pregnant and when I became a mom, I was like, wow. And then it was even more like, how can you give up a child?
Yeah.
How can you?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's
Oh
like,
my God. I
that's
couldn't even imagine.
Like
You know,
gestating a tiny soul and then giving it away. Like you invest literally 9 months
yeah.
to
Right.
creating something, and it is like we do need to talk about that. We don't often revere birth mothers for that. You know, we're not going to get into the political ramifications or this discussion, but there are other options. So for this person to carry you for that 9 months, I always wondered, did you ever like think about maybe not going through with the adoption? And then I was a month adopted, a month, I think 6 weeks after my date. So there's this thought in my head. I'm like, did you have me for a month and a half and then give me up? Like, I don't know where I was for that period of time. And that to me, like just thinking about being a woman and seeing my friends get pregnant and stuff, like I feel really awkward around babies.
Very.
And you know, like holding it, you're like,
yeah, that's a funny point, because I feel the same way about babies. Like when you hold a newborn, I just feel like, oh, there's that soft spot, self-destruction button on their head, and like it's all weird, and like they're so helpless, and you're like, giraffes have to withstand a 6-foot drop at birth. Like babies are so, it's crazy, and humans are so fragile. But you know, I was fortunate enough to have my brothers growing up because I'm a triplet, but I do have to touch upon what you said when you saw your own son, that like I have brothers and sisters that I grew up with, and they're step siblings or whatever you want to call them, but I never viewed them like that. And so they've all had kids, and I have nieces and nephews, and I love them and I would do anything for them. But when my triplet brother Justin had his son and I held him, as an adoptee, you can't. You can't. It's not that I don't love my nieces and nephews for my brothers and sisters. There's nothing. It's not about that. Yeah. It's just seeing your genetics.
That's it. That's it.
And Chris is an identical triplet, and so please.
Yeah. So basically, I'm feeling like if I had a kid, this is what the kid would kind of pretty much look like, you know. And
if I'm wrong about this, internet, please don't at me. I'm doing my best with what I know, but I think actually, Chris, as an identical triplet, knowing what I know from my friend who's an identical twin, your children would be half siblings with your, like genetically would be half siblings with your brother's kids. Mm-hmm. So if that makes sense, because it's like the same, because you have the same genetics. So that essentially that would be what your child would look like if you had married.
There's this idea, like there's two things, right? Like being an adoptee and wanting to find your adoptive family or your biological family for really like deep reasons. And then there's other reasons like
superficial.
I'm just curious. Like I just want to see like what that looks like. Like
eyes, hair, mannerisms, like all that stuff.
Like, so when I finally saw a picture of my biological mother, it was like, oh.
Yeah. So walk us through the birth parent search. Like how old were you? When did you start this? What sparked it? Because it's always different for everyone.
So when I started it, like I said, maybe in my 20s, like I got it kind of brewing and it was swirling about and I wanted to do it, but I didn't know where to start because I knew that I couldn't just go and ask my adoptive mother, like,
which should be where you go.
Yeah, exactly. Like, do you have information? And I was very hesitant to bring it up. And at one point, I believe my brother had some girlfriend and she bought him like an adoption book, like about finding your parents. And my mom found it and she like blew her top. So we just knew that it was like something that she couldn't handle.
That's so wholesome. Like best.
I don't know these books exist. Like Claire was saying that, oh, my parents gave me a book about what is I never got any of those books. It was all just like face-to-face. Yeah,
Chris, you could. I don't think you would resonate from a book. I feel like so. Chris is very like in your face, confrontational. Like if someone gave you a book, you'd be like, no, tell me what's in this book.
I don't need this book to tell me. I need you to tell me.
You to tell me.
Yeah. So, I kind of wavered back and forth, and then, like I said, I was dating a therapist who, I mean, not like a regular therapist, like a straight up psychoanalytic psychotherapist. And so those are the ones who get all up in your childhood.
Would he ask you questions like just kind of knee jerk reaction of what he does normally? Like, would he?
I mean, I think it just was his spirit by nature. Yeah. It was like, he couldn't turn it off.
Yeah.
And
that's fun.
I mean, it was helpful, for what I needed at the time, but it was like, so I would say, it wasn't even that long ago. It was probably maybe 4 years ago, I like really started it. So
Okay.
I was watching that. What's that show? There's a show like where they find the is it like not birth finder, but it used to be, I think it was on TLC or something like. So I
Okay.
saw this episode with Evelyn Lozado, the ex Chado Chocinco's ex-wife.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
She's on Ballers or something like that. Basketball wife. That her. So she had an episode with this private investigator who he like helped her find, I want to say, her biological grandfather.
Oh,
Helped
that's a
her
weird
find,
jump.
yeah, so he helped find that person. Let me look him up. Like something just struck in me. I'm like, let me see what this guy does. And I saw that he had a company called Birth Finder.
Huh.
So I go, I call him up and I'm like, this is what I need. And Jay, his name is Jay. He has like a crazy last name too. I'll look up his last name. So his name is Jay. And Jay, the private investigator, was like a world-renowned private investigator.
Whoa.
Okay. So I'm like, dude, I can't afford this. I'm not going to be able to afford this. And the universe is powerful because this is his calling. It is his calling in life to help adoptees find their biological families. And so he did it for me for a very nominal fee. And he was very happy to help me. And the thing about my adoption is I knew that my biological mom wasn't American. And Chris, you may be able to relate to this, that it makes it a little bit harder when people are coming from like third world countries, because the records are all funky and it's just not the same. So a lot of
them are forged. A lot of these documents are just fake, or they I mean, that was
it's deep.
Okay, so my boyfriend in high school, it was an adoptee as well, and he was like older and like finding his parents. But I found out through him with Saskatchewan, they could write a letter, and they would write a letter to tell the kids, well, like what, like you have a grandfather, this is what's in our, But I found out that a lot of times they were instructed that this was going to also be put towards if your kid was going to be adopted, so they would lie. Mm-hmm. They would lie on that too, the birth mother, to give the kid the best chance or to misdirect the information. So they wouldn't put any like health records, or they'd be like, we loved each other very much, but couldn't afford you, not, that type of thing. But we are so lucky as domestic adoptees. And that's one thing that we don't even think about in terms of, there was always that option for me that I could just go to the government, right? And be like, what's my story? And so for you guys, for me, it breaks my heart that Chris has information that he doesn't know that's true, that he has to go back and find that.
Yes.
So what did Jay do with finding this information? Because like you said, all the documents, you don't know what's real and what's not.
Jay, like I said, he was a renowned private investigator. He told me a story about how he went to like Guatemala and like found like a kidnapped like kid. Like he's like one of those. Wow. And so he knew what he was doing. He he knew what he was doing. He was like, there's a very good chance that I will find them. So you better be ready.
Wow.
And I was like, okay.
I need to meet Jay.
Oh my God. Jay is legit. Let me tell you. So
okay,
we had a series of conversations. He had access to the birth index. Okay.
What's that?
Birth index is from my understanding, and I don't know exactly what it is, but the birth index is it's not a birth certificate, but it's basically like records that hospitals have that can tell you like when a baby was born and like what their last name was at the time. So
is that international?
I'm not sure, because I was actually born in Hawaiian Gardens, like right by Long Beach. Yeah, so I was actually born in the United States. So he had access to the birth index, and he was able to find this information. And so he found my biological mother's last name. So we had that, and we knew like about how old she was, and that she was like in around like the Long Beach, LA area. So he started, with some leads, and going back to what you had said earlier, like looking at people, seeing pictures of people who may look like you, and he would send me like, he's like, well, this could be her. The timeline matches up. Like I'm calling people, and I remember seeing a picture of a lady, and I'm like, wanting her to look like me, and then again, it's really hard because you're like, well, I mean, she's Black, like, kind of looking like, I guess, so I'm like, I don't know, and she kind of had like a big nose like mine, like, and so I was like, well, maybe, and then we kind of reached out to some people, and that was a dead end. And so that's hard, that's a part that they don't tell you about as an adoptee, because
it's just the roller coaster.
Yeah, it's very emotional. So the time from when we first started the journey. And so he's like, I hadn't gotten my letter yet. So I didn't get like those finite details. So we were just going off a whim, like just to the stuff I remembered and just, so that he knew.
So you hadn't found the letter in the drawer yet is what you're referencing. Oh, so
I didn't have it in my hand. So I had to order that letter again from Sacramento, and that takes
So you didn't keep it? Did you secretly look at that letter? Did you sneak it?
I looked at it, put it back, made like, and things were like etched in my brain, like of what it was. Like I like little things like her father was an engineer, like she just like little different things that I picked up from there, but I just hurried up, read it, put it back. And I didn't look at it again. And then I ordered it from Sacramento. So, but that didn't come until way later. So with Jay,
does that cost you money to do that?
No, it doesn't. I think it's the right of every adoptee to get.
Yeah, I think you just request. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so Jay's like, you really need to take a DNA test. That has been beautiful tool for adoptees. And people have their own feelings around it, like government stealing our DNA, like a bunch of stuff. But for someone who knows nothing about nothing, it's like, it's a start.
Yep.
So I took the DNA test, and when I got my ancestry.
Okay.
So I took the DNA test, and in the midst of that, he was still kind of looking and saying, well, like, at least we know this, know that what her last name is, and there's only so many brackets that live. That's her maiden name. There's only so many brackets that live, in that area and stuff like that. And so once I got my DNA test back, I mean, Jay had found her within 24 hours. Like,
whoa.
He did his thing. Like I got a second cousin. Okay.
Ooh.
Okay.
I had a match for a second cousin. And I didn't know, before my mom or they had said, oh, your family's from the Virgin Islands. And that was what was written in the letter. So somebody wrote that with the knowledge that wasn't true.
Got it. Okay. So when your adoptive mom told you that was purely, she wasn't trying to deceive you. That's what she was told.
That was what it was written in this letter.
Yep.
Yeah, she didn't know.
Okay.
And then when I got my DNA results back, and I'm like, oh, Caribbean, I was like, but like straight up Belizean, like, wait, these people, like, they're like straight Belizean. And I was like, wow, this is so interesting. So the person who I matched with, I told Jay, and Jay's like did his thing. I don't even know, because she had a different name as well. And then I think it was, I matched with this two people. Both of them were second cousins. And the first one that I matched with, her name was Jennifer. He contacted her, or he tried to contact her. He couldn't get in touch with her, and he found her dad. So when he found her, when he found her dad, he's like, I talked to Leonard, and he doesn't know very much. And, this is, I think this might be your mom, And so I was like, so in the midst of that, the girl who I matched with, her cousin, I looked her up. I knew her last name was Brackett. I looked her up on Facebook.
And as
lo
all
and
adoptees
behold,
do. Yeah.
and lo and behold, I had a mutual friend with my biological cousin.
Go Facebook.
On Facebook.
Chris and I. And Chris is like used to kind of have a hate on for Facebook.
And
Facebook
here's
can
the
help you
best
search.
part about it is that they lived in San Francisco.
What?
And so it's just the universe is I mean, and I've heard stuff like this before. Like, I never thought it would happen to me. Like, just how it all clicks together. Like how
The timing. It's the timing, you
yeah,
know?
and then
because
just even how you hear from some adoptees that, oh, I was living down the street from like my biological like dad or something like that.
I just heard that.
Literally, my biological cousin, like, she was like a prominent figure in the neighborhood that I worked in. So she was well known. So I called her one day and I inboxed.
Mhm.
Okay.
She's like, oh my God, like, this is so crazy. Because initially I thought that she was my sister. So we couldn't quite figure it all out. Like, I don't know enough about DNA. Like, it's weird because sometimes people could be like your half sibling or sometimes they could be your cousin. It's weird. So I didn't know. And I was like, well, do you think you could be my sister? And so she starts kind of telling me, well, here's the thing about Belize or Belizeans. And this is that disconnect, right? Because culturally, that's not my culture. So I don't. And she's like, girl, people adopt kids and give away kids and kids be gone. And nobody really, so I have no idea who your mom or your dad is.
Okay.
And I was just like, okay. So she was like, I'm going to kind of check. And she's like, I remember a cousin or something that may have been like, I remember hearing something about something, but I'm not sure. So in that couple of days, Jay was able to narrow down who it was. He found out that who my biological mother was. And, and like kind of, concurrent with that, I was also talking to the other cousin that I had connected with via Ancestry. And so Jake, I remember so distinctly, like, he was like, oh, I think this is who it may be. So then of course I start looking up on Facebook and I'm like, and the first person that I found was my auntie, like my biological aunt. And we look so much alike. Like,
so she's gorgeous.
So she's absolutely stunning. And I also didn't know, like, when I found her, she has like an open Instagram. So I started following her.
Oh, wow.
Weirdo. You know what I mean? Like, all weirdo.
Well, that's not weird.
It's not weird.
Because do other adoptees do stuff like that?
Yeah, it's normal.
Okay.
So I'm gonna admit something.
It's acceptable creepiness. It's acceptable creepiness.
Chris, that photo I sent you was you guys. This is embarrassing. It was from a LinkedIn.
Oh. Look, this is this is one of the I think the positive sides of social media. But
he called her for you.
He did.
That's so nice.
He's a good.
I need Jay in my life.
He does that. Like, he's a very good liaison.
I'm scared to meet Jay.
It will get it done. He's a very good liaison. And
I'll be sitting like this with Jay.
He was like, again, I'll never forget this phone call because Jay held space for my tears because I was like, and he had called me and I, of course, I'm like, well, what did she say? What's going to happen? And she did not want anything to do with me. And it was much like because at first I think Jay is really, he does these a lot. So he kind of knows how to talk to folks and stuff like that. So he just goes from the angle, look, I have this person who's looking for you. They really want to know their medical information. It's really important to them. And so it takes the edge off, I think, a little bit to come from that angle.
For sure.
Yeah. So he was just tells them like, they don't want anything else. They just want to basically corroborate like that you are there. And she kind of like was like, okay, but I never want to hear about this or talk about this again. So of course I was crushed, I was like,
but,
dang.
so sorry.
But this goes back to that opening that door, it's like,
And here's the thing, it was, in hindsight, I understand like why it was so painful for her.
It's revisiting that,
everyone.
like I think people don't realize also, I think personally, and you guys can tell me how you guys feel about this, but I feel that for the birth mother, it's almost worse because
absolutely,
it's the memories. We have no memories. We have no pictures in our head, and with these birth mothers, that's something that they live with forever, So.
And also the stigma. So in the adoption story too, like just as much as adoptive moms are revered and put on this pedestal, I think birth moms are also, even some of the language we use, we're like, how could you give me away? And we're not, we're also giving that, stigma to them as well, right? And a lot of these people we talk about, we have to repress and we have to do stuff. I guarantee there was no like, oh, you're giving up a baby for adoption, let's give you some extensive therapy, right? They had to repress it too. And a lot of times they wouldn't tell their new partner. They've rebuilt this life. Like they have to probably on that day, our birthdays, like repress it and think about it and then like not tell anyone else. So then we come and now we're there, like the dirty little secret, and we're like, hi. And they're like, no, I didn't tell anyone about you.
And that's exactly what it was. Like no one knew.
But isn't that the irony, I think, of the situation is that both sides feel shame, and it's
that
with Korea, not only with the shame that the birth mothers feel, I think not all, but like majority of mothers that give away babies is this shame. But with Korea specifically, the whole government lives in shame, and they've done things to try to correct that and maybe try to make amends. But it's on both sides, and then how do we bridge that gap,
Yeah.
So Jay,
every piece.
Yeah.
So Jay says shame.
Jay found your birth mother, and then did she give him information with medical records and stuff?
She just gave him like some pretty generic information. I mean, It wasn't a lot. What really kind of started to unfold the whole thing was this other cousin, and her name is Joy. And Joy, I wrote her, I inboxed her Facebook, and I just kind of told her my blurb. Like I always had it like copy and paste it because I like put it to like a bunch of people.
You do it so much.
And
we all do it. I think we all have a copy and paste thing.
I know.
Exactly, because I'm like, come on now. So I sent her this whole like, diatribe, like, oh, my name's Nikole, like, I'm an adoptee, and she was like, I can't wait to talk to you. And I was like, ooh, right? Like it gave me a pang. I was like, oh my, like, what does she know, right? Oh, I had no idea what I was about to step into. Because I knew that just in that little bit, I knew enough to know that no one really knew about me. So, like as far as their family went. And so it was like, I knew that it was going to be a lot. So I was like, prepare myself for this story, right?
Thank you so much for joining us for this very special episode of Origins Unknown podcast. For part 2 of Nikole's story, make sure to tune in next week. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our Patreon for exclusive access to bonus episodes and early releases of episodes. We will also have access to discounts on future upcoming Adopted AF merch. Thanks! If you'd like to connect with us on Instagram or TikTok, you can find us at
Origins Unknown Podcast.
You can follow my co-host at
Beyond the Tats.
You can find me at
Sea Bear Huntington. We're also on Twitter. Follow us at
Unknown Podcast. If you'd like to visit our website, it's
originsunknownpodcast.com. Also, if you'd like to send us questions, share your story, or even just say hi, you can send us an email at
hello@originsunknownpodcast.com. Special thanks to Pace Randolph for writing, performing, and producing the audio for our podcast. Follow him on Spotify for more wonderful music.